Everybody, welcome to a long overdue episode of Besides the Revolution podcast with Jack and I. We're back. It's going to be a good one, probably a little bit longer than our normal ones because it's been way too long to catch up. So, Jack, good to see you. Glad to be back with you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Aaron. Apologies to our viewers for how long this has taken us. I know you've been busy, I've been busy, but we've been really enjoying. Even though there's been days over the last few months where it's been very difficult to really put much out, it's been a lot of fun. Continuing to do this, and I'm excited to get back into the podcast, and let's try and get back to doing this weekly if we can. But as you say, today's is going to be an interesting one because you and I have got two big topics to talk about, and then we have a really exciting interview, I think, towards the end of the podcast. That I think
absolutely, it was a great interview, and we'll get to it in a minute. But Jack, one of the things that happened this week is the stuff that happened in Ukraine. I'm at my wit's end in terms of the whole entire situation. I just cannot understand why we continue to send, Lindsey Grahamnesty and Mike Pompeo and everybody over to try to make this thing continue to go. It's an unwinnable war, even though, there are positive things, I suppose, from the Ukrainian perspective that happened. I just don't get it. I can't understand why we insist on this creep of NATO. So I know you've been writing a lot more for defense stuff, so go at it.
Yeah, so actually one of the things that's changed in the last few months and why I've been so busy is that I'm back to national security, defense, and war reporting, which is funny for someone like me. So, very strongly anti-war. I've been a hippie my entire life, a right hippie, as some might say. I do take great interest in writing about this stuff. And so I'm back at National Security Journal at 1945.com and covering this stuff. And boy, is it interesting because I was writing for maybe 2 years on this topic for the first 2 years of the war. And then I had about a year off. And now I'm back to writing it. And during that year, I certainly kept my eye on what was going on, but nowhere near as closely as when I was first reporting on it. And seeing the difference on the battlefield from then to now, first of all, I would say that in those first 2 years, my reporting leaned heavily towards the suggestion that Ukraine was actually doing really well because Russia did not expect this war to go on for as long as it did. It was immediately hit with sanctions, and those sanctions started to hurt. Russia really wanted the help of China and didn't get it. And so for a long time, Russia was struggling to replace equipment that was being lost. It was struggling to replace ammunition and missiles and all this. And Ukraine was doing quite well. And they even had some successes. Ukraine even briefly made an incursion into Kursk in Russia. So they took control of Russian territory. Didn't last very long, but they did it. So it's kind of like, as a White House unnamed source said the other day, that the White House kind of views this recent attack that Ukraine made, Operation Spider's Web, where they sent drones deep into Russia and destroyed aircraft in 4 air bases. They described it as a chihuahua, like taking a chunk out of a much bigger dog, which is kind of what it was then and what it is now. But the difference now is that Russia is proving quite capable of sustaining this war, not just in terms of ammunition. So Russia is manufacturing far more ammunition, missiles, than the EU and the US combined, substantially so. And so they're proving that they're capable of restocking and that they can keep fighting. And that's why Russia has put Ukraine back on the defensive very much. They've always been on the defensive, but more so now. But nobody really expected them to be able to produce this much ammunition and continue fighting back. And so now it's very much looking like Russia is winning this war. Period. It doesn't matter what these EU leaders say. They are winning, but easily. They're about to hit 1 million casualties. Anytime. They don't care. They're continuing to fight. There was a report from the IISS that said that Russia could easily afford to keep fighting this war for another 1 to 2 years, but potentially, honestly, even beyond that. But it's not just in terms of ammunition and being able to replace equipment that they lose. Russia has managed to sustain a wartime economy in quite an impressive way. They lean heavily on the banking sector, even despite sanctions, and also on the energy sector. And I made a point the other day actually on my private Facebook page, and it prompted a negative response from a friend of mine who is quite anti-Trump when I said this. I said, Trump is doing things now that Joe Biden never even thought of to hurt Russia. And this is an underreported story, I think. So Russia has been in the Middle East lately, and he's been shaking hands with world leaders that people might not have expected him to, be nice to.
Yeah.
And he's proving that he can be quite diplomatic, and he's forging new ties in the Middle East. And that's actually a really positive thing, I think. And it's kind of building on what he did in the first term with the Abraham Accords. I think it's a good thing. But I think what he's actually doing is sweetening them up, because OPEC is now producing more oil.
For sure.
They've substantially increased production and are about to do so for the third consecutive month. Now, the expectation here is that global oil prices will therefore lower. And what happens if oil prices go down? Well, Trump can say that it's a big victory and he's responsible for it, and Americans will pay less for oil and petrol at the gas pump and all that. Great. The other implication of this that I don't really see many people talking about, there was a great guy.
Russia so much.
Russia's screwed because they're depending on sales of oil. They've been selling cheap oil now, discounted oil to India. And India was taking advantage of that as early as 2022, I think. As soon as the sanctions were placed on Russia, India was buying up cheap oil. Yeah. If Russia can't sell cheap oil anymore, they're going to be really hurt. So that is something I think is quite impressive. And it's really hard for me to know where to go here, because I've been writing so much about this lately, Aaron. There's so many things that I just want to dump. I'm such a nerd with this stuff lately. But I think that's particularly interesting. But also this Operation Spider's Web. There was news today about just how much damage Ukraine actually did. Now, in the last few days, I was looking at open source intelligence to see how accurate Ukraine's claim is with regards to how much damage they did. So the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, said that 41 aircraft were damaged across 4 air bases. And these were Tu-95Ms, Tu-160s, Tu-22M3s. Basically, these form the backbone of Russia's nuclear triad. A lot of these planes are nuclear capable. They're also able, to, of course, carry conventional missiles. And they're necessary on the battlefield for Russia. They need these to cause devastating strikes in Ukraine. And so when Ukraine said that they destroyed 41 of them, that's 34%, I think that's the right number, of their entire fleet.
Sure. That's
huge. And so it's no wonder Putin is now backing out of negotiations again and telling Trump that he's going to respond. Here's the thing. It's not 41. The open source intelligence I was looking at was saying something along the lines of maybe 13, and it was actually across 2 air bases, and in the other 2 air bases, the strikes were stopped. And Russia actually themselves said that they stopped the strikes, but they only confirmed 2 fires.
Right.
Long story short, US officials are now saying that it looks like, I think, between 10 and 20. Still big, but nowhere near the number that Ukraine was claiming. And so it's just very interesting, the dynamics here. And coming back to Trump, which I think our viewers and listeners here will be interested in, I think Trump felt that he was close to a deal. And I think he actually was probably right to think that. Because for a long time, you may remember, Ukraine, Zelensky said there will be no concessions. We will take back Crimea, and we will not concede any territory at all to Russia. Well, in recent weeks, the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military, who's now UK ambassador to the UK, will not try pronouncing his name because I always get it wrong. He said that Ukraine must now abandon hopes of returning to the borders of 1991, and that they must now fight a high-tech war of survival. And that's what's happening. And then when Putin launched those strikes against Kiev and other major urban population centers, Trump responded by calling him crazy and lashing out. And there was something that I noticed that not that many people picked up on. I'm surprised they didn't. I think because people have ideological intentions when they're reporting on this stuff, and I really genuinely tried to stay quite pragmatic and realist about this. What happened is Trump called Putin crazy, and then Dmitry Peskov and Sergei Lavrov both kissed Trump's ass. Not a very I wouldn't write "kiss Trump's ass" in my columns, put it that way, but it's what
That's
happened.
what happened. Yes.
They responded by saying that, there were heightened emotions and they understand why Trump was saying it, but they're very, very thankful for the work that Trump's been doing to negotiate a new deal and get people down at the table again. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because that's not what they've been saying up until now. And so I felt at that point that Russia knew they were going to get concessions from Ukraine. And they knew that if they keep escalating now, like boom, 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 we're going to hit these population centers really hard and prove quite how resilient and strong we are. Then once they do get back to the negotiating table, Ukraine will not only go ahead with the concessions they've stated they're willing to make, they might get some more too. Art of the deal stuff. But then Ukraine launches Operation Spider's Web against Russia, which Trump behind the scenes apparently thinks was badass. And it was, in a way. They smuggled drones in 3,000 miles from Kiev into Russia, and caused total devastation in some respects. And now Putin is back to saying, yeah, no, we're not interested in talks. Medvedev is saying that they're not interested in negotiations. They want total victory. And Putin has told Trump that he has no choice but to respond. So I feel, and maybe some people think I'm delusional, I don't know, I felt we were close to a deal. Now, nope. I think we're closer to the deployment of a tactical nuclear weapon than we are a negotiated deal.
100%. It's the craziest, dumbest. There's no sanity in it to me. It's either, I said this morning in the news. This is either lunacy or just pure out disregard for anything related to humanity. And I just think it's the case. I mean, I think Putin is well within his rights to be frustrated about NATO's just absolute relentless pursuit of an eastern boundary. I think it's totally asinine that we are in that position in which you've got to get to the place at which they're literally 100 miles from the border. I mean, it's just, we would never tolerate it. We would never put up with it if we were the United States. No other Western country would put up with it. They're not interested in it. So the idea that we just continue this relentless pursuit and sending these clowns. I mean, Mike Pompeo is a clown. I don't care what anybody thinks of him. If they think positively of him and disagree with me, he's a clown. He's a total warmonger, and he comes along with his best bud, Lindsey Graham. I mean, it's to go over and have these discussions before this strike. I mean, I don't know. Arrest them when they come home, in my opinion. I think they deserve it. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous position for us to be in. I do not understand why we're doing it. I know there's people, and I've had conversations within the military with friends that are in the military who think this is a great thing because we're replenishing our base and our arms stuff. But I'm just tired of the whole thing. And I think, honestly, you watch this big, beautiful bill stuff, which we'll get into in a minute, but nothing's changing. This absolute relentless pursuit towards war, this machine under the hood it's driving in a direction. And I don't know how you fix it. Our conversation later, which we'll get into about AI and all the stuff that is there, when you take away the consequence of sending young men and women to go die on the front because of these abilities to do technological strikes and sort of re-ante up the war by using drones to blow up $100 million bombers, then you have erased any consequence amongst the populace for war. And so you just do it. It'll be endless wars. It'll be 1984 Oceania. We're always at war with this and that. And I don't know. I don't look forward to the future at the moment.
It could well be the case that happens. And, like I said before, Russia is already looking down the barrel of a gun here in terms of reaching this 1 million milestone of casualties. They may have already reached it now. and Putin's still going ahead with the war because he's got a point to prove.
This is the historic lesson of Russia. If you go towards Russia, they will never stop. They don't stop. They will throw more men and material at things, and they have said they did it in the Second World War. They did it in the First World War before the Revolution. They did it in the Crimean War. I mean, they have done this over and over and over again. I mean, this is historic stuff. This is what Russia does. You go to Russia to lose, period.
And, you know, and like I say, my work and my writing on this is not done through an ideological lens. I sympathize with Ukraine greatly. I sympathize with everybody that's hurt in this conflict. I mean, people forget Russian soldiers are dying. Innocent Russians who are sent out into the meat grinder are dying. They're not Vladimir Putin. They're Russian citizens. You know, I'm a citizen of the United Kingdom. Our leader is Keir Starmer. Don't particularly like him, but, you know, I'm one of their people. Doesn't mean he's representative of me. So there are people being lost on both sides. By the way, there's also North Korean men, sadly, who are being just shoved into the front lines. Almost like the charge of the Light Brigade. They're just being sent out and they don't care what happens to them. It's really, it's such a sad situation. And the reason I bring that up is just, I find it quite shocking if it is true that before Operation Spider's Web, Ukraine did not give a heads up to the United States. It appears to be that that's what happened. I don't know whether Trump was unaware that they were going to pull the trigger. We don't know whether he was actually unaware of the plan at all. Like, he may not have known anything about Operation Spider's Web because it's been in planning since the Biden administration. For Ukraine not to inform the United States that that's what they were about to do, I think is a problem because, as I say, I feel as though we were close to a negotiated deal. I don't know if Ukraine really believes that they can win this war or whether at this point they're just trying to inflict so much damage that they think that they can minimize their concessions. That might be what's happening here. But, you know, what Trump's doing, I think, and he is predictably unpredictable and consistently inconsistent. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But at least now, I feel like right now, what he's doing is looking at this from a realist perspective and saying, well, this war simply needs to end. Because Ukraine can continue fighting using Western weapons, and then they're trying to convince NATO that continuing to fund Ukraine could actually contribute towards the increase to 5% of defense spending. So that's a clever way of getting more support from NATO. They're also arguing that funding the Ukraine war is actually funding their own security because they're learning from Ukraine's tactics and how to deal with Russia in the future. But at the end of the day, they can't win this war. And so the question is, do we come to a settled agreement now or later when more people have died? But also, and this is my final point before we move to the next point, the next topic, we aren't looking long into the future here. Say we beat Russia, we're not going to. What will global power dynamics look like at that point? Our relationship with Russia is going to be far worse than it is now. And, you know, you could say, well, Russia bad, China bad. And yeah, they are. They do things that are completely unethical and that we would never do. And they're a problem. But we're not going to win a war with them. We certainly don't want to go to war with them. And so would it be better off that we negotiate a deal now, make some concessions? And I'm sorry to say that, I really am, because if I was Ukrainian, I'm sure I would feel differently. But it feels like it's the only path that we have. And then from there, think about how we handle this in the long term. Are there better ways for us to coexist with Russia and China? Are there ways in which we can work with them and maybe over a long period of time steer them in a different direction? Putin's not going to be around forever. Who knows what the future of Russia is? Who knows what, frankly, the future of China is? We don't know these things. And so rather than putting ourselves in a position of weakness and of further hostility with countries that we need to figure out how we're going to live alongside, maybe now is the time that we cut our losses, come to a deal, and figure out the best solution for everybody who's been negatively impacted by this war is for the future. You know, it's a difficult one, and I will be called a Russian asset for saying that. Let me be clear.
Well, I'll double down on you, Jack. Every death that's in Russia and Ukraine is the responsibility of the United States, period. Full stop. It's our fault. And I will not apologize for that. We're the ones that have pushed NATO over and over and over. We've pushed these people further east, which is what we said we would not do when the Cold War ended. And every death that has happened on the fields of Ukraine and in the fields of Russia are the fault of the United States. And I'll stand by that until the FBI shows up at my door.
Yep. I hear you. I will say one final thing, by the way, on that, just because it's an important point. So I wrote about this recently too. We said that we wouldn't expand eastwards with NATO. Yes and no. But there's a reason I'm telling you this. So there's technically no written agreement that would happen. And the agreement that Putin often cites is Gorbachev saying that there was a line that Gorbachev was told that they wouldn't move eastward. This is where this comes from. But what they were talking about was German tanks. They weren't talking about NATO's borders. And Gorbachev himself said I forget when this was now, but he did an interview some time ago where he admitted that. So there's no written agreement, nothing here. Being said, as like you said earlier, we wouldn't want them that close to our borders, especially if we were let's face it, Russia is a smaller force than us, depending how you look at it, I suppose. We must be willing and capable of looking at things from their perspective. And while Putin is certainly being dishonest, because there is no written agreement that we wouldn't expand eastwards, we can obviously understand that that's what he doesn't want. Yep. And this guy has nuclear weapons. He's got a military. He's willing and capable of losing 1 million people and continuing to go to war afterwards. So maybe we should stop and think, okay, well, even if we disagree with this, was it wise? Was it smart to get ourselves in this position? Maybe not.
No. And the longer this goes on, the more we push and the more we do this stuff, the more likely it is that China gets involved, and they will not be on our side. So it's terrible. Anyway, so sir, for that depressing topic, let's move on to another one that's equally as depressing, which is the big, beautiful bill. I've been opposed to this thing from the beginning. I think it's a terrible, terrible kind of hallmark of Washington and their normal lunacy in relationship to how they spend money and what they do. Big news over the last 2 days, obviously, has been the kind of parting ways between Elon Musk and President Trump. I understand the politics of this, but it doesn't make them good. It doesn't make them right. So the idea that we've worked so hard on this is like, well, so it's terrible. What does it, if you worked on crap for the whole time, what does it mean? You just made crap. It doesn't make it any better. I don't care how long you work on it. It's still crap. And I have that impression of this. And I think that's what Musk finally boiled over. I have a long piece today at House and Habit about it, and it's kind of the back end of this, which is, I think this is the ceremoniously unceremonious divorce of two philosophies. One of which is the sort of boomer-esque world that we have inherited, which is one that the America always works, and one in which there's a confrontation of that in terms of our generations and younger who are saying, no, America doesn't actually work, and this sort of way in which you operate is why it doesn't work. This endless spending, the war machine, the kind of perpetual things, this is a divorce of that philosophy. And I'd be curious what your take is on that, because I have mine, and I clearly have laid that out.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me immediately, and this is something you and I talked about before, and perhaps you can educate me here, because remember, I'm foreign, so I do know a lot about what's going on in the United States, but your system still works differently. I've been here 4 years now. Maybe I should feel more American than I do, but I don't. But anyway, what strikes me as interesting as an outsider, in a sense, is how much can be shoved into one bill that is completely irrelevant. And a good example of this is, why is it that legislators it went to the House first. It got approval in the House by like 1 or 2 votes or something. No, 4 votes, I think it was. Could be wrong. Anyway, people who approved it are now coming out and saying, like Marjorie Taylor,
I
didn't see this section where it said that we would ban AI regulation for 10 years from the states. Excuse me? What? This is You didn't just sign a piece of legislation that said we're going to increase spending in this area by 0.25% or
No.
something inconsequential. You signed legislation that banned the states from implementing AI regulation for 10 years. Do you know how much development and how much change there can be in 10 years with regards to AI technology? Extraordinary. And they signed it. So why on earth does the United States or the American people accept a system where these bills are getting passed, shoved in, where measures that are completely irrelevant are being shoved into it and just being passed? Who came up with that legislation? Who voted for that person who put that section in the legislation? Does Trump know about it? And if he does know about it, does he understand the consequences of it? And why the hell did elected representatives not pick up on this? Because I guarantee you, as someone who's not read the bill too, probably read as much of it as Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, what else is in there that they just passed? What else is there?
That's the thing. This is the American system. They just shovel shit into it until the very last minute. Excuse my language, but that's just what it is. It's just shoveled in terms of backroom deals and all the different things in order to win the votes. These are inconsequential numbers to the government. They have no conversation about it. The most infuriating conversation that I listened to actually over the last little bit was Ron Johnson, who I just, I like him. I think he's good. He was elected in the Tea Party, but this idea that you can just nibble around the edges and massage it. He's opposed to the bill, which I'm grateful for. But this idea that, well, it's really not that much money. It's not that big a deal. It's not that kind of because of our GDP. If I hear another person talk about GDP in our world and how important it is to a thriving society, I will quit. I just can't do it. I can't listen to that conversation any longer because it has nothing to do with the betterment of the future of our people. We are saddling the backs of our children and our children's children and their children and the children beyond that. And we're saying, you're going to pay for my current life right now. You're going to do it right now. And I don't care who you are. And it doesn't matter. You've never met them. You don't know them. You have no deal. And you've burdened their backs with this deal. I would never blame my children if they looked me in the eye and said, pound sand. You people ruined this deal. And I'm not playing along. I'm not going into your wars. I'm not participating in your thing. I'm not going to pay your taxes. I quit. And if they did, I would be right alongside them to say, congratulations, you have made the right choice. This is lunacy. The stuff that's going on between Musk and Trump is really interesting. I don't think this is just a battle of egos. It is a battle of egos for sure. But it's not just a battle of egos. I think Musk actually believes this. I think he's a true believer in the conversation around the debt. I think he's a true believer in fiscal responsibility. And I think he's infuriated that he went there with the idea that he could do this and he could run it as if it were a business. He could come in, he could make it happen. He could, by exposing it and saying out loud, this is what's happening in Washington, there would be enough political capital behind it to make it happen. And what he's most disillusioned with is the fact that none of those people, they would take pictures with him, they would smile with him, they pat him on the back, they tell him everything that he was doing was great, but their rhetoric will never, ever match their voting record. They will never do it. There's 2 guys in Washington, 3 guys in Washington, maybe. But the Republicans are fabulous at this. They're fabulous at going into this place of basically their rhetoric can never match their record. And they're the only ones that have to deal with this. The Democrats are more honest about it. They'll tell you exactly right to your face that they want to steal from you. The Republicans have to do this dog and pony show that they're really for fiscal responsibility. And at the end of the day, they're not. I'm talking so fast, Jack, you're going to have to cut me off and talk because I just get too worked up about it.
No, you're absolutely. I'm just sat here agreeing with you, Aaron. And this talk about, well, the amount of money we're talking about doesn't really matter because of GDP. Well, you're making a lot of assumptions.
Whose GDP? Your children's? I mean, good God.
And how do you know what's going to happen in the future, especially with AI? We don't know what our economy is even going to look like in 5 years. We have no idea. And if these AI people are correct, then money starts to mean nothing eventually anyway. Who knows what GDP growth looks like, if at all, when, we're living in a world where big businesses get richer because they're more streamlined and have fewer workers. More people are out of work and potentially living off the government, and workers are replaced by robots. Suddenly the value of money changes dramatically. You don't know. You can't predict anything into the future at this point. This isn't the 20th century. 20th century, from the beginning to end, looked largely the same in terms of like economic models in general, social contract and so on. It was the same world with different technology. This is the 21st century. This next century is going to look dramatically different. You cannot assume anything. And so when you're talking about these huge sums of money, you're absolutely right. Look at what we're burdening our children with. An uncertain future in terms of technology, because we're not talking about regulation and actively working against regulation at a time when we don't even know how this new technology is going to affect us. We're not having conversations about how to implement it safely, and we're just spending money willy-nilly. It's shocking and it's surprising, because Trump ran
I know.
on this thing. It was Trump and said
I know.
that Elon, and said that he was willing to give Elon the reins and let him do what's necessary. And Elon tried. Again, I'm not an Elon sycophant. I'm not a Trump sycophant, but I do think Elon really tried. But he came nowhere near close to that 2 trillion estimation. And I don't think
you can't touch it. They won't let him do it, and they won't participate with it. And yeah, it's really infuriating. It's really frustrating. I think that to sort of close this particular section on this discussion about it, I think one of the things that we have to have this conversation as a nation, which is, I do not understand. And this has kind of been an organ song for me for the last however many weeks, months, years, potentially. I'm not sure how long we're willing to go to bat and fight for 50 stars on a flag. I just don't understand it. I don't know why we're burdening people with things that are being made in decisions in Washington. When, if Colorado wants to be what it is, it should be what it is. And if Wyoming wants to be what it is, it should be it. It's how it's set up. I do not understand this, like, all top-down management conversation with budgets, with regulation, with all of it. I don't know, how long will it last? How long will people choose to do this for the insanity of being burdened by people who have no consequences for it? Doesn't matter if you elect them. It doesn't matter who you elect. The Leviathan underneath all of it continues to run. And I think it's a depressing moment. So with that, tell us about our interview that's coming up. If we want to talk, it is a little brighter than this first half of the show has been.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking to Brent Eastwood, who is a colleague of mine at National Security Journal. As I'm wrapping up, by the way, my toddler is kicking off in the other room right on cue, so I'm sorry if you can hear him in the background. But Brent Eastwood is an author and a writer, and he works in a similar area to me. As I say, we both write about national security. But in particular, the reason I thought it'd be interesting to talk to is upon looking him up recently, once we connected on Twitter, I saw a video of his from 8 years ago talking about AI. And I just thought, how fascinating. Here's someone who's worked in AI for a really long time, and I'd love to get his thoughts. So, yeah, we've recorded a really interesting chat with him, and I really hope our viewers here will appreciate it. But we're very excited today to talk about a few things that we've been wanting to talk about for a while, but also to interview our new friend, Brent Eastwood. Brent Eastwood is an author and a writer. He's the former founder and CEO of GovBrain, which was a fintech company that automatically predicted world events using machine learning and artificial intelligence. He was formerly a fellow for technology at the R Street Institute, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. And how I know Brent is because he writes for the same national security news websites that I do. He's the senior defense editor and columnist for National Security Journal, where you'll find my writing. And he also publishes frequently at 1945. He's also the author of Don't Turn Your Back on the World, A Conservative Foreign Policy, and Humans, Machines, and Data, Future Trends in Warfare. Brent, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks. This is great. I'm really excited. It's such a growth area, and, we're hitting it at the right time. And, this is an age of when the internet first started getting going. And, we're probably old enough to remember that in the 90s. And so here we go again. It reminds me of Bitcoin too, and how that is growing. And, I have to admit, I'm a Bitcoiner myself. So
You're in good company. You're in good company.
That's that whole libertarian thing that we were talking
about. It is.
But let me start off to get into AI. Let me start off with, you mentioned GovBrain, and that goes back to 2013. So that's when I first trained an AI model. We ended up training 2 AI models on that. And so we were predicting financial market moves, geopolitical events, and elections. And the way that worked is we took thousands upon thousands of articles and news releases, and then we had a module. And so I was the one that did supervised learning. So I trained, and I used a 1 through 10 system where 10 meant this is definitely going to happen. This is a bullish event. This is a slam dunk, to 5, which was neutral. We don't know. And to 1, this is never going to happen, or a bearish event. So we did that 1 through 10. And that went all into the system in a supervised learning module. And after a while, after we did all that, this thing would work. I mean, it would spit out a number, but we quickly changed that into a prediction. And if, especially on financial market moves, on stocks, commodities, bonds, and currencies, we could beat Reuters and Bloomberg. So let's say we got a news release from the government and it would come out and it would mention a company that would match to a ticker symbol. And then that would predict the market move before Reuters and Bloomberg could write about it. So the reporter's sitting there typing things in. We have got our prediction in, and it already goes to a hedge fund that is doing algorithmic trading or automatic trading. And then they would make the trade and we would beat them. Now, it didn't have, those were called hits. We didn't get enough hits as I wanted, but we would get them. And those trades were very profitable. And then there's the elections. We got Trump right in the primary. We got Trump right in the general, first time around. We had a string of about 5 straight elections that we did, we did elections later. So starting around 2017, 2018. And then the geopolitical events, we would beat things too. And then this whole thing was a dashboard that people could use. So it was really interesting. It ran its course. We ended up, kind of our customers dropped off. We had competition that raised millions of dollars and went public. And that's the publicly traded company kind of put us out, and we ended up losing all of our contracts. But during that time, we were ahead of the game, won some awards. The thing was profitable. It didn't grow a lot, but I can say that I had a profitable tech company.
Right.
So that was really interesting. And so as a result of that work, I kind of call myself now a geostrategist. And that's kind of a pretentious term. And what does that mean? Well, it means somebody who's got some expertise in diplomacy, intelligence, military, economics, and politics. And I've worked in all those fields. And so if you can take all of that and put it together, connect the dots, and predict the future, have some experience predicting the future, that job title is not big now, because I put it on LinkedIn and I stopped getting invites and people stopped answering my invites. It's not a popular title. I think it's because people don't even know what it is. But I think in 5 to 10 years, people will really know what it is. So we'll have a bifurcation of job titles. So there'll be the strategist kind of jobs in the knowledge economy, and then we'll have the analyst types of jobs in the knowledge economy. And if you happen to be able to put those dots together, predict the future, you could maybe become a strategist and be safe from AI being replaced. And then if you're an analyst, it's going to be a lot harder, especially in finance and law and these types of fields, And so I would tell a young person to kind of hang out in grad school and try to get a PhD, or else go to trade school. There's going to be kind of, if you're in between there, and I don't want to tell people with an undergrad that you're going to be replaced, because I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. But I think if you kind of hang out in grad school and try to figure out where this AI thing is going to go and be nimble with your career. And I stayed in grad school too long, but it kind of helped me figure out what I wanted to do. Got a couple of master's degrees and a PhD, stayed in too long, but I was on the GI Bill from the military, so that helped. So, but then the trade school option, that is going to be welders and pipe fitters and people who work on oil rigs, and those types of untouchable hands-on jobs will be safer, as you guys know, than the knowledge economy jobs where you're just an analyst. So I see strategists and analysts, and I get a lot of this from, you guys read Isaac Asimov in the Foundation series? Yeah. You're a little bit familiar with that? Well, they had this type of person called the psychohistorian and psychohistory, if you remember. And so these were people that could predict the future based on society and all the worlds. And Asimov was way ahead of his time. So I'm not saying we're going to have psychohistory, but I am saying we're going to have people who are higher level order thinkers in abstract terms that not can really beat the AI, but work with it really well. And so you're going to have that bifurcation there. And hopefully you're not considered an analyst by work, and then the worst happens. So
Well, it's kind of like looking at AI as if you're looking at this from a perspective of somebody who does, analytics work. Is AI a tool to simply replace you, or can it be a tool for research purposes? Because as I'm sure you know, you can well just tell AI, hey, I want you to write a piece looking at this, this, and this. But the AI is not actually thinking, and it can pull patterns together and it can pull information together. And it might well write an article that people who are somewhat unfamiliar with AI wouldn't be able to notice it's AI. But sometimes it pulls things together that don't really match, don't really make sense together, and it can't simply replace an analyst. So you're right. There's absolutely ways in which people are going to be using this technology. But what you just said is interesting, because I do find myself now regretting not becoming a plumber or something.
Yeah, I mean, like in some terms, I made more money when I drove a forklift and I was a furniture mover in college. When I first got out, he went into.
I look at my lawn guy he comes and cuts my lawn like once a week, and he's done in no time, and he's off to the next job. I think he's probably making more than me. It's crazy, but
he's getting cash under the table. Yeah, but so after I did the startup, or while I was doing the startup, I was amazed at how it was working, and I got kind of scared because I thought, well, what if this gets in the wrong hands? What if a foreign government could figure out how to do this and then do some misinformation and disinformation and say, oh, we have all these predictions, and it would fake people out. And so that's how I got into the ethics of AI in 2017 and did that video. And the premise of that video is pretty simple. It's almost embarrassingly simple. I basically just
mentioned this video on the podcast yet, by the way, Brent?
No, you have not.
Okay, so just to preface this, Brent, and then please remember your thought. When I was looking at Brent's work before we decided to make this podcast, I came across a video of his from 8 years or so ago, where he was talking about AI long before a lot of people even knew that it was a thing. And that's why I wanted to talk to Brent. So please tell us about that video.
And so I was thinking, okay, I got to do something about ethics. I went out to Silicon Valley and I visited Stanford. I'd been to Stanford a couple of times, and I went into the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and I wanted to talk to a professor named Andrew Ng, who is a well-known person in the AI field. And he wasn't available, so I just kind of walked around, took some pictures, and I was like, oh, I got to go to SAIL, which is the acronym. And I was like, this is great. This is just a seminal place of AI that would give me inspiration for talking about ethics. I went down and I sat down in the lobby, and I wanted to put those pictures on social media and say, wow, I'm at the mecca of artificial intelligence. Well, it looked like I was a spy. And so the alarm went off, and it was like, and I'm like, oh man, they're mad at me. So I got out of there really quick, and that was my Stanford story, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for that. But I was going to say, I was teaching at the time, and I was like, I'm a fellow academic, I'm not stealing anything, and there wasn't anything. And you know what? There wasn't really much to see in there. And Andrew Ng had his door closed anyway. So after I did that visit at Silicon Valley, if you can't get a good idea at Stanford, it's going to be really hard to get a good idea. But that gave me the impetus to make that video and start talking about ethics. And like I said before, it was really simple. I mean, I just basically said good people have to train the models. Now, this was a time, that sounds really obvious, but this was a time where people were scared about the Terminator thing and how far this was going to grow. So I wanted to start talking about how the quality of a person's moral compass and integrity are the people, and lack of bias that you want people to have when they're training these models. And that turned out to be one of the things that people got really concerned with. Would be, how is this, are there going to be hallucinations that give people bad thoughts, the impetus of bad actions? These are all things that I started thinking about in that video. It was about 30 minutes long. And I also was a little bit mystified by how far AI did not go. And, it was like, where is the self-driving car? And how come when I was at Stanford, I couldn't take a self-driving car to San Francisco, an autonomous vehicle? Where were the flying cars? What was the next thing? where is the humanoid robot that can do housework? Well, we had Roomba, so I was a little bit frustrated about where we were in 2017. And, we've come further along now that we're in 2025. So that was what was behind that video. And I still like to think about ethics, and especially when the large language models hallucinate and you wonder, okay, where are they getting this stuff? Where is it coming from? We know Grok is coming from our X feed. What sites are they using? How much of our data is going in there, and what are the ethics behind that?
I'd have some questions around the ethics stuff, because I think it's really it's an imperative to this conversation going forward. Not the job stuff and the things that will come of it are the consequences. So I want to set that aside, but the ethics of it, I'm the Aristotle portion of me wants to talk about the human flourishing and the human good. And that's this sort of highest ethic, is the pursuit of happiness is eudaimonia, which is just this idea that you're going after this human flourishing. I'm curious how this interface between a maximalist pursuit of this technology and the human flourishing and human good that comes of it, how do you see that interfacing?
I wish I could go back in time and think about the person that I was when I was training that model the first time in 2013. Because is predicting an event really a societal good? Or was I just helping hedge funds make some money? I had a real ethical problem with that, because everybody wants to do a startup that changes the world. And people were complaining. They're like, we need, especially when Brexit was a big one. And we didn't predict on Brexit. We kind of missed that one. And we didn't give any guidance on Brexit, other than I went to New York City, talked to people on Wall Street, and I said, Brexit is going to come. But the system, that was kind of my prediction. I predicted Brexit by myself, but the system didn't. But is that a societal good? Because when Trump was elected and when he rose up through the primaries, there were CEOs that were giving interviews, and they're saying, who can predict this stuff? Why do we not know this? And I was kind of raising my hand and saying, well, we predicted that. And, I got some calls with some underlings, not the CEOs themselves. And so I was saying to myself, all right, are we doing good? Like, do no harm, don't do evil. And that got me, yeah, that got me kind of scared, because, my wife would say, you're just helping hedge funds. And I'd say, yeah, but there's other people that are affected by the predictions. And so it was an ethical dilemma for sure.
How does that work though, in terms of like the people, I think one of the biggest questions I have about AI in general is, who's going to be the one that decides how this thing impacts our society going forward?
That would be the strategist that I was talking about. Those types of people.
And how do we assure that those strategists aren't corruptible?
That's the thing. That's what I was getting at in the ethics video, and I should probably make another video and update it too.
For sure.
Because how do we know? At OpenAI and Alphabet and Meta, who these people are. We know Sam Altman, we know Jensen Huang, we know the public faces, but who are those minions inside there, and how are they training this? The LLMs are unsupervised training, with neural networks.
Right.
But, it's like, who is it? And then who is going to be doing the coding in the future if a lot of software engineers are starting to get laid off? So
it kind of becomes like AI developing itself and policing itself in some ways. And I suppose even, if that were to happen, the way that the AI would police itself and improve itself is based on the very foundational stuff from where it came. And so the decisions being made by the people working on it now or years into the past will have really long-lasting implications, I assume. I'm not someone who deeply understands this technology, more so the implications. And I suppose that's kind of what Elon Musk has been saying with regards to Grok is that the model needs to be as truthful as possible. And it seems like he's really, I have many issues with Elon Musk. I'm by no means a sycophant of his, but I think he's absolutely right on that point. And, we cannot be certain. In fact, we can probably assume that OpenAI and others are nowhere near as invested in this idea of truth as the Grok model might be, perhaps. But even then, we're seeing Grok makes mistakes too. It's by no means an easy thing to conquer.
My quibble with large language models is that they're not stable over time. You can ask it same question, an hour later, it'll give you a different answer. And some of the research that I did at that think tank you mentioned, where I tried to get a sentiment analysis over, I did a kind of a research project, like let's rate all the think tanks out there and see what a large language model would rate it in terms of how truthful and how trustworthy they were. And you can ask ChatGPT, rate a think tank from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most truthful and the best known think tank that does the best work, and 0. And I would ask that question at different times, and I would get different answers. It wouldn't stay stable. And
I'm sorry, just immediate thought there. Is that because it's accessing data, presumably whatever data is accessible to it? So presumably now it would be whatever is online, because these LLMs are plugged into the internet to an extent, that is, because I know that it's still ChatGPT still thinks that Biden is the president. Is it really just a matter of what information is accessible at that time, or what information is more prominent online at that time? So, for example, if you go into Google and search for something in the morning, and then you search for something in the evening, the news cycles change, the topics change slightly. And so I'm assuming that these LLMs are accessing data in a similar way that we are, and may well be getting these, different data points at different times.
Yeah, getting different signals. So it's a probability. It's trying to predict the next word and the next sentence that is coming out of the output after a prompt. And so that probability could change. What we did was we used 1 through 10 was great because it was on the normal distribution, the bell curve. So you could look at standard deviation, you could look at skewness, you could look at the spikiness of the curve. And then that's how we did a lot of our predictions for geopolitics, because we broke it down by country. So if we were getting a lot of positive sentiment and we noticed that that bell curve was shifting over, we were like, oh, there are some positive things happening around the world. And the exact opposite would happen if it was shifting over to the negative side on the bell curve, on the normal distribution. So then we broke that down by country, and we could go into a country. And that's how we got into the prediction of elections, because we broke it down. We followed, 60 countries, I think. And you could go in and click and get a sentiment analysis on the news that was coming out of that country. So that changed. Our system changed too, because the news was changing every day. And so it was getting new inputs to the system. So I think that gets at what you were talking about earlier.
And so when these systems are making predictions, am I right to say that effectively what's happening is it's doing something that a human could do, but with such a vast amount of information that it would take an extraordinary amount of time for a human to draw all these conclusions and put them all together in the same way? Is it the same kind of process as a human might look at data, pull relevant points, and then draw conclusions from that?
That's what I see. And that person I was talking about, the strategist or Asimov's psychohistorian, is the person that could do that, not as fast, obviously, as AI, but could do it on their own. And that gets into the strategist versus the analyst paradigm that I talked about earlier.
And I suppose if you're looking at these systems, or if indeed these systems can be unbiased, then what you're really doing is taking away that human bias that often comes with people who put forward what they think or what they claim to be an unbiased or a fair assessment of what's going on and what might happen. For example, with Brexit, the overwhelming consensus was that Brexit was not going to happen. Right. But for people like me, I'm in New York now, but I'm originally from near Liverpool in England. And so I know what it's like to grow up in a northern town in England that didn't really feel or see the benefits of being in the European Union, that was living in areas that were frankly in poverty. There was a great line from someone on Twitter who said that people think that Britain is a rich country, but really London's a rich country attached to a poor country, which is the case. And so for us living outside of London in England, it was obvious that Brexit was going to happen. But all the analysts, for the most part, were saying absolutely no way, it's not going to happen. And I don't think that was a lack of data. I don't think it was a lack of information. It seems to me that it was honest, sheer bias. They didn't want to see the things that were happening outside of London. They didn't want to envision this idea that Britain might actually do it. And they also probably didn't want to encourage people to vote for Brexit by giving them the idea that it might happen. So in a way, it's kind
That's right.
of interference, I think. And so that's a really fascinating idea that, even as someone who, frankly, I do not like AI, I'm just in the acceptance stage, I think, of my grief at this point. It's really fascinating to see ways that it can be used that could, in theory, defeat bias. But what we're kind of seeing now is, it's very possible that it could also be used as a tool for bias.
Absolutely. And the other thing that bias is moving towards, and you probably noticed this putting in prompts to any large language model, is that there is kind of like this bedside manner that is showing up, like a psychiatrist.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like saying, "Tell me how you feel," or I'm sorry you feel that way."
Yeah.
And my wife has played around with this a little bit, asking it very intense questions, because unfortunately my brother-in-law he's a cancer survivor, but it's come back. So she had been pretty emotional about her sister and our brother-in-law. And so the large language model would say things like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." I don't know which one she was using. I think she was using ChatGPT. And how can I help?
Right.
Right. And so you're getting these emotional attachments to it. And now we assume, here's another thing, you're talking about living in the north of England by Liverpool. Well, my folks live in Kentucky, which is pretty far away from the wonderful elitist capitals of New York City, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. And so we were taught their last visit, they were here in Easter, and we were talking about ChatGPT and Grok and artificial intelligence. And my mom, who is quite intelligent, was like, "What is this? I've never even heard of it." Yeah, never even heard of it. So what does that mean? What does that tell you? Does that tell you that it is not progressing the way we think it is? Or is this an elitist tool? It had ChatGPT had 140 million users, right? Very early, quicker than any other app, so those people were early adopters for sure. Are we going to have late adopters that don't get into it until they buy a humanoid robot? That's something to think about too.
Is it a generational thing?
Is it a generational thing? Right.
Because I know,
because my parents are boomers.
That's it. And, I know some boomers who do use it, but for the most part, I don't think boomers really do or care. And I can kind of get that. It's kind of, I always wondered when I was young, why it is that, my grandparents, for instance, were so useless with a mobile phone. You don't think about these things when you're young because it's like, well, it's obvious. You just press these buttons and you send a text, granddad. But whereas my granddad's got this mobile phone from nearly 20 years ago that he still uses, and I have to go through it when I visit him and show him that he's getting urgent messages from the hospital that he's not reading. It's like, come on, granddad. And so I never understood this. But now I'm starting to see it because I'm reluctant. Even at just 32 years old, I'm reluctant to use this new stuff because I'm kind of set in my ways. So I think there's definitely a generational thing. But it seems to me that AI is 10 times, 100 times, maybe 1,000 times more consequential than even the internet. So it's something that's going to very quickly become a big part of our lives, whether we like it or not, even just because of the economic implications of this stuff, that people are going to be exposed to it, whether they like it or not. But I think right now, really, probably what we're seeing is Gen Z using this a lot in school and in work, and millennials perhaps using it too. But yeah, it's really just a matter of time before it's widely adopted.
My son's 17, and I'm hoping he's not going to be replaced because he wants to go into agriculture and botany and entomology. And so he's dead set on this. You know, he's going to college next year or after his senior year, and he'll be in an ag school. And so I'm thinking, all right, if he is hands-on and he breeds insects now and he raises plants and he grows his garden, will that make him safe? He still uses ChatGPT though, because he's looking at different soils and different breeding patterns for the insects. So he's using it as a tool. And I asked him how much. He's like, yeah, a couple times a week, you know. So is he going to be safe? Because I have a niece who wants to go into entertainment business and could probably come out as a lower level analyst working for a film company, or let's say, for example. Is that a job that's safe? You know, right. You know, when I got out, I went into broadcasting. Well, we know that there's AI avatars that are doing some broadcasting, even on radio, you know, and
really?
Yeah. Because I just read an article about a guy who got laid off from a radio station, and he was like, oh, it's okay, I got other things to do. But then he found out the same radio station released AI avatar DJs. I think they were doing news reading too. And he was like, what the heck? I mean,
I totally believe it. I don't think any job is safe. Honestly, which prompts me to one of the questions I want to ask you, which is just, what is the interface is there a responsibility for regulatory framework for government? I tend to sort of shy away from some of those things from time to time in terms of how to do this. But, you know, like we were mentioning off before we get going, I see this as existential in some ways as nuclear weapons. I think Jack does too. We have decided as a human species that some things are off limits in terms of how we interface with them and what we do with them. Do you see a role for government regulatory framework, proliferation treaties? I mean, does it get to that place ever in this conversation?
I worked on that in AI policy. I didn't get real deep into it. There's about, in the United States, counting state legislatures and city councils and county commissions, at least 1,000 pieces of legislation that are out there around the country. That doesn't include Congress. Now, the good thing about that, speaking about Congress, I used to work in Congress, 435 members in the House, 100 in the Senate. Each one of those members has somebody on staff that is expert in AI, in my opinion. Not the member, that person. Some members don't even do their own email.
Are you saying they should or they do have?
I think they do. I really think it is such a fear regulatory-wise. And I wouldn't say that across the country in state and local government, but I feel pretty confident that each office on Capitol Hill has an AI person that maybe there'll be varying amounts of expertise. Jay Obernolte, who is a representative on the House side, he's actually worked in AI. He started out in video games. He had a company. He was a founder and has AI experience. So they trot him out a lot. He happens to be a Republican, but he's pretty moderate. And they trot him out a lot. He gives a lot of talks. Now, in terms of regulation, we could use some guardrails and rules of the road. As the libertarian conservative in me, I want a light touch in regulation. I want to preempt some of these state bills that maybe won't pass, but some of the stuff coming out of California is pretty shocking. And
really? I can't imagine.
You can't imagine that, or New York.
Can you just quickly tell us what's coming out?
So we do need the rules of the road, but I want a light touch, and I want something called permissionless innovation, which we had during the internet. So there is a role for these bills, but let's treat it more like the internet of the 90s. So we get that permissionless innovation, because if we get outregulated by the EU, we're going to lose to China. Because it's
on that theme, I've two lines of questioning here. One, I'd like to hear what's coming out of California, because I have read a little about what they were talking about before. And And I think that's particularly interesting because buried in the big, beautiful bill was this line that members of Congress who, if they do have people on staff who are AI specialists, I'm amazed that they never picked up on this, because there's that line, that paragraph in the big, beautiful bill that effectively bans state governments from regulating AI themselves for 10 years. My understanding is it wouldn't stop the US government from regulating it, but it would stop all these bills coming out of the states. And then also just on that front, this idea of losing the race to China. I'm going to push back slightly here. So the idea is that if we regulate AI, we can't win the race against China. Meanwhile, China themselves are regulating AI. So they're putting through legislation. I don't know if it's passed yet already, but I think it has. AI content, whether that's visual, text, audio, anything like that, will need to be labeled. This is AI content. And one of the things that I've suggested myself in the past is that rather than trying to just stamp out AI, which is something I might have said once upon a time, maybe a year or two ago.
We might even have a podcast that says that.
Yeah, we probably do. But, as I say, I'm in my acceptance, or maybe the bargaining stage, we'll see. What China's doing is labeling the AI. And what I've said is that if we are able to require companies that are using AI content to explicitly state that that content is AI, what it might do is, in a way, use the sort of power of the free market to limit the amount of damage that's done, at least in the short to medium term, with regards to employment. So, for example, if you are a news organization or a print magazine or something like that, and all of a sudden you're using AI to write articles, to generate images, and so on, I know people who are genuinely interested in this kind of content would certainly not be happy to see a magazine or a website that is forced to state at the front, this content was generated in part or in full by AI. That's what they're doing in China. I think it would be a smart move here, at least for the time being, while we're navigating, this new AI world and figuring out how to implement it into our lives. Do you not think that kind of regulation might be helpful? Does that fit into your view?
That would help. Some companies are doing that. Bloomberg News, Bloomberg TV has all that information on the screen, and they do a rundown of all their articles, and it's an automated AI summarizer of their content. Some of it is biased because I watch it and I was like, oh my goodness. They're doing that on their own. They're saying that this is AI. Now they're feeding the model with their own content. And so I would like to see more of that, knowing, and then of course, who got replaced, whose job was it used to be that did the summary for Bloomberg TV? Is that person still there, or do they get a different job? But I would like to see, because I'm full all the time. My wife will show me a picture or a video and I'm like, is that real or is that AI? And some of this stuff is so good. Some of it is obvious, but it's only going to get better.
That's it. People think that we're safe because you can just about figure out that something is AI. And, a year ago, it was a bit easier to figure it out. 2 years ago, it was much easier, but it's getting better and better and better, to the point where there used to be my company that was, impacted by AI. We pivoted a little, and we've had to utilize AI in our operations. And, I had an ongoing joke with my editor before I was unfortunately forced to fire him. I didn't want to fire him. We were forced to, from the economics of what happened to us. But we used to have ongoing jokes where we would text one another in the style of AI, because we were so frustrated with the way that it spoke, the weird phrases that it came out with, the tenses that it would use, and it was just so frustrating. But that seems to have almost gone away now. Some of these really funny tells of AI have changed, and there are a few left, but for the most part, it's getting harder and harder. And people think that, we're safe because you can see those tells. But as I remind everyone, it's only going to get better. This is the worst AI will ever be at generating video and photographs and text. This is the worst.
Don't forget audio too. I have 4 books. 2 of them, Amazon contacted me and sent me an email and said, hey, would you like your books to be on Audible, and would you like them to be voiced? And we do it automatically with AI. And I said, sure. They said, pick the voice. Do you want American or British, male or female? And I said, yes. They said, okay. In 2 hours, they had voiced both books.
Yeah.
And I'm on Audible automatically. People ask me, like, are you going to voice your book? And I was like, yeah, probably not. But they did it. And it sounds pretty good. And then I got another email a few weeks ago that said, oh, we've done another run through with a new voice and made it more lifelike. And so that gives you an example of what Amazon's doing. So, and how quickly that is. So, and now I had people who's like, hey, I got an email from a guy who said, I'm a professional voice, a voicer, voiceover person, voiceover. And he said, can I voice your book? And here's an example. And I had to tell the guy, no, poor guy. I mean, that was his livelihood, but it's being replaced. It's done automatically now. And I don't have to do anything. I didn't have to pay. It was free.
It's so scary because the impact this is already having on the economy and jobs. I've seen a few reports where people have said, we've analyzed 20 different industries and found that only 1% of workers were impacted, and it's nowhere near as bad as it seems. And I remember reading these reports, and they were looking at the wrong industries completely, because I know as a matter of fact how it's hurting people. So my business was, we provide content services to various kinds of companies. We did a lot of work in the newsletter industry, email newsletters.
Sure.
But beyond that, we did work with think tanks and all sorts of stuff. And I had to let 40 people go just over a year ago. After one phone call, I had to let 40 people go. And I know, I get phone calls all the time from people in the same industry telling me that they've lost everything, that they don't know how to rebuild. And,
Sorry.
It's reached a point where in my industry and others, where AI is not as good, but it's good enough. And for many clients, good enough is good enough.
Right. Good enough. Yeah. 80-20 creative plant principle. Yeah.
That's it. And, in China, something like, I forget the exact figure now, but I believe it was more than 50% of jobs in the video game designing industry have been completely wiped out. It's all moving to AI. So I look at these reports and I think you're not looking at the right industries. In particular as well, they should be looking at freelancers. Now, people think that freelance is just people having side gigs or something. That's not true. A lot of people make very good money and a living by being freelance workers. It's just called owning a business. And, if you look at the websites that provide services for freelancers to connect, Upwork is an example, and there are many others. These job boards are being completely replaced. No longer are they looking for designers or coders or writers who are very skilled and have spent 10, 20, 30 years being very good at what they do. They don't want to pay a premium for those people anymore. What they're asking for is, hey, can you use ChatGPT for us and just make sure the content is good? And we'll pay you maybe 30 to 20% of what you would have been paid before, which is shocking because really what they're doing is they're saying, well, you're probably going to work the same amount of hours, but your value is less now. So you're going to get paid this much, and it might not even meet minimum wage in some occasions. So the impact is already there. I forget exactly where I was going with this, but I'm sure you'll have thoughts on it. The impact is already happening. Oh, and by the way, the point that I was going to make, my business, here's what we used to do. I'm very interested in helping people who find themselves in a position where regular employment is difficult. That was a real strength of our business. So I had single mothers working for me who would work in the hours that worked for them when their kids were asleep or something. And it was a lifeline for these people. They can't go out and do a job because they're stay at home. Disabled people. One of my top editors had lupus. She couldn't go out and get a normal job, but she was fantastic with me, and we worked around, her needs. And also people, I also write in the extremism space, and I'm very interested in de-radicalization. And what I would do is give people who have had a bad start in life or have made the wrong decisions and have made themselves unemployable by things they've done when they were young, and giving them opportunities too. And so that was something I really enjoyed doing. I know I'm not the only one who did it too. Freelance was a lifeline for those people, and AI has effectively wiped out this industry. So where we are now is people who have been effectively replaced by AI cannot easily just go out and do something new. They can't go out and learn to code because learning to code isn't really a wise thing to do anymore. And for whatever reason, they couldn't get other jobs anyway. So, we're looking at a lot of people being displaced. And one thing, I'm sorry, this is a long tangent. Aaron will tell you I do long tangents all the time. One of the things I looked at in a piece I wrote a while ago, for 1945, is there's something like 18.5 million people in the United States who work in administrative roles.
Right.
And this is something Andrew Yang has brought up too, talking about jobs that require repetition. Those administrative roles and jobs that require repetitive work are really at risk of AI. It's really not a matter of whether AI can do it. It's a matter of when are these companies going to catch up and deploy the technology to replace those people. So it's a ticking time bomb, and it could happen next year. It could happen in 3 years, probably not much further along than that, I don't think. Millions, if not tens of millions of people put out of work. And here's the question. Without regulation, saying that businesses can't do that, which I know is not an easy thing to simply just, legislate or enforce, what are those people going to do? That's my big question.
Yeah. Well, look at journalism. So what I think is going to happen with journalism is there will be eventually SEO on Google. Google's going to open the floodgates and allow search engine optimization to include artificial intelligence. When the floodgates open, then I think everything is going to be written by a human will be an op-ed form. It will be opinion pieces, and it will be first person. And so we'll have some experts. So you and I went right in defense. So we're talking about an airplane. Well, let's talk to a pilot who flew the airplane, because that's a first person, hands-on person that you can't ask AI what it's like to fly an airplane. So that'll happen. But I think writing in the first person, and I try to do this when it's appropriate. I don't do it a lot, but I will write in the first person if I have some personal experience that is valid and is relevant. And I think that is going to be a way that we can get around the AI replacing journalists. But there will be so many that will not be able to make that jump. And it's going to be really scary. Now, the other types of people that are going to do well in the AI world are the hands-on adventurous. I call them triumph of the human spirit. So people who are doing triumph of the human spirit, there's a gentleman out in West Texas who bought land, and he's trying to grow a forest in the desert, which is impossible. But he puts it on YouTube, and he's got sponsors, and he's doing pretty well at it. So there are these people who, another example in California, a gentleman bought an old silver mine and is trying to change the town. He bought the town and the silver mine, and he's trying to refurbish this. He puts it all on YouTube, and he's got all these helpers, and he's built up this, what I call the triumph of the human spirit. My favorite sci-fi writer, Andy Weir, who did The Martian and a couple other books, and he's got a new one coming out that's going to be a movie. His books, if you think about it, are very much futuristic triumph of the human spirit. Yeah. Sports, sports will still be fine because we're looking for heroes. So I think there will be some winners. There will be a lot of losers. But I am planning for ways that my writing can be more opinion oriented, because anything else, just like the airplane has this altitude, this speed, these types of missiles, man, oh man. I mean, we do that, and it's people can just chat GPT that easily, and that can be, and education is going to be upended too. I was talking to a woman who's a new teacher, probably about 24, and she's a math teacher at a high school. And she said she was getting the same types of questions on certain problems from the same students. So she thought, there's got to be a way I can automate this. So she built, using Python and ChatGPT, a little tutor module. Now, that's interesting because, A, she had no computer science background at all. And no AI, she wasn't even a really big user of ChatGPT, but she started using it. Okay, so think about that. You're replacing your web developers and your Python developers, and what that person used to be known as a computer engineer, software engineer. So that person is being replaced. She is replacing a chunk of herself. that would normally be the teacher of that particular problem. Where does that stop? Because if she she tells the principal that she's teaching, let's say she's teaching in a private school, and budgetary reasons could make her job chopped. She tells the principal, and the principal says, "Well, why don't you make it for your whole class for 24/7?" And then that teacher's not needed, and she started it. So she's being very smart, but it just keeps snowballing.
I suppose that in the education space, it really depends on how parents respond to that. You know, I'm a parent. You know, if we're planning on homeschooling my son, fingers crossed that works out. Aaron homeschools. I'm probably going to be asking you for some tips soon, Aaron. But you know, if he were in school, I know that I would be very much opposed to, you know, this idea of an AI classroom. And I think we're, even with, you know, how useful AI is going to be, and it's almost certainly going to be incorporated into the classroom, I do personally get the impression that teachers are going to be safe, because parents are not going to want their child to turn up to a classroom and just sit staring at an AI avatar on a screen or something.
Yeah, I hope so, because I'm a teacher part-time as a professor,
right?
And I do online classes too. And so I wonder, you know, how much will this online avatar take me over? But I think at the expense of schools, the students are still going to pay for a live professor, but how much? You know, and that, and so going back to that strategist versus analyst, and maybe the PhD degree is not really safe in academia, but maybe PhDs can be used in industry. There's kind of a movement to make that happen. Will there be professors that are needed and teachers that are needed as much? That's a question, you know, and can teachers, since they have so much expertise, can they become the strategists, or will they be analysts, and then they'll be, you know, cut loose?
They just kind of the tweakers of the AI. Yeah, it's a very interesting future. Brent, I think kind of be interesting to wrap up the conversation with this kind of question, I suppose, is if you could give a bold prediction over the next 20 years, what happens to that initial question I asked you in terms of Aristotle's ethics, you know, the flourishing of humanity versus this maximalist society? Where will that battle intersect over the next 20 years? And what do you see happening at the end of that 20-year period?
I see humanoid robots that are autonomous, and that will come. Early adopters will use them for home chores. There will be home robots. I would love to have one. I might be an early adopter. They'll be really expensive. But cooking, cleaning, maybe even childcare. I think we're going to go that way, and that's going to be the Isaac Asimov test for iRobot. You know, is that something we want to see?
How do you assign that? I mean, do you feel like that's you say you'd be an early adopter. Like, what do you feel in terms of the actual, I don't know, the good or the negative of that?
I love it. I think I'm okay with it. I mean, the humanoid robot at the house doing stuff that I don't want to do, or my wife doesn't want to do, I'm okay with that. I think that's where we're going. I think that's when we'll have general intelligence, general AGI. Yeah.
That, you know, we really do need to wrap this up. And I think, Brent, if you're willing to come back, I'd love to do another conversation with you on this.
Sure.
There's so much to cover. But just, I'm now forgetting my line of thought because I was excited to do it. How about this? As a sign off, you and I both write on national security, defense, and war all the time. We're seeing in Ukraine that they've completely pivoted in terms of how they fight this war, because they're resource restrained. They're lacking in air defense systems. They are producing nowhere near enough ammunition that they need, and they simply can't produce as much as Russia is producing. Russia's manufacturing something like 5 times more ammunition than the US and the EU combined. I think that number's right. And so what they're doing now is they're producing, 100,000 drones a month domestically in Ukraine. And they're using this insane drone warfare to cause damage. So like a $600 drone just took out $100 million aircraft in these air bases in Russia after operations.
Completely asymmetrical. Yeah.
it's astonishing. At the end of the day, those planes can cause far more damage than the drones can, but they're proving that they can take them out.
Nuclear weapons. Yeah,
that's it. Well, here's the question: those drones are largely, for the most part, I understand, operated by human operators, but AI is being introduced, and it's allowing for support with reconnaissance missions and so on. Where are we going in terms of warfare once this AI technology opens up and is just widely used? I feel like we're reaching a point where wars are no longer going to be fought by human beings. You talk about these robots at the home doing the dishes, but we're going to have robots out on the battlefield that, much like those dogs that they have, I forget what they're called. It's a robot that looks like a dog. They're going to be sent out with machine guns on the back. Sure. It's not going to be humanoid robots on the battlefield. It's going to be AI powered drones and all sorts of other machines. And I suppose is that an equalizer? That's my question. Is that an equalizer, do you think?
Well, I first started writing about drones in 2001 and 2002, and they were called unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, back then. Yeah. And this was before we armed the first Predator with a Hellfire missile or with other types of missiles. The Hellfire came a little bit after that. And the Hunter UAV was what the Army had, and I was in the Army. And so I was writing about this. And I only foresaw back then the reconnaissance aspect and the surveillance of the video and how that could be used to change warfare in terms of having your drones networked with tanks and having them fly out ahead and being the eyes in the sky. That whole arming of them, I did not foresee. And then when I wrote my 2021 book on future warfare, I did talk about swarming drones and autonomous drones. I didn't use the term first-person view, FPV, but I saw that the drone swarms would be good, but never did I see what Ukraine did with them coming out of the boxes after they were transported by truck to get there. Just ingenious. Now, what I would say if I were advising, and I just wrote about this, if I were advising Zelensky, I would say, listen, you need to know the difference between tactics and strategy. Great tactic, go ahead and do it, but don't expect the war to change the facts on the ground, especially at the front lines. Yeah. And so this is going to be, I've seen counter drone technology where the defenses are jamming them electronically. And then I've seen an automatic weapon that says it's better than doing that, just to shoot them down with AI autonomously, to shoot them down with a 50 caliber round or something like that. And so where do we go next? Now that's the question, because we're going to keep producing the drones. Do you remember at the beginning of the year, Turkey was getting all of this adulation about the Bayraktar drone? And we don't talk about that anymore because it was easy to shoot down eventually. It did a great job initially, but now the FPVs are so cheap to make and so ubiquitous, and there's so many of them that you don't hear as much about Turkey anymore as you did at the beginning of the war. And so that's how much has changed since the invasion.
Yeah. I just wonder whether the more widespread use of this technology, and once it becomes more available, will it make smaller armies more efficient and more effective? And so it could well completely change the global power dynamics entirely. Small armies become powerful, bigger armies that have, bigger resources. And, so what if they have, these $100 million bombers that can drop nuclear weapons? The question is, are they going to use that nuclear weapon? Probably no. So we're all left with the same stuff. We're all left with these autonomous drones, autonomous vehicles, AI fighting tools. I don't know. I think the global power dynamics will shift dramatically in the next few years. And I wonder whether that's coming into consideration with regards to what Moscow is, considering to be its next move.
And you and I both read about tanks and if they're going to be obsolete. There's some great tanks out there, but they're still they don't have enough armor at the top. And that is where the FPV drone flies into. and it's pretty simple.
They
And
don't
you
even
can build
look
code
like
cages, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, I don't know if you've seen this, but I presume you've written extensively about these attacks too, Brent. But even early in the war, when there was no AI stuff, really, they were simply flying drones over tanks and dropping grenades into open hatches. Simple as that. Boom. And Ukraine is no longer deploying tanks the way that it used to, and Russia isn't either.
Same way. Yeah, Russia's
They're being separated. They're being used as part of a wider operation with different tools and vehicles and weapons, because they know that if they have too many of these tanks in one place, all it takes is just a few of these drones and all gone. It's very
one principle of warfare that was huge during Operation Desert Storm, where the United States and allies were so successful, is the principle of mass, where it's the Weinberger-Powell doctrine, which is go big or go home. The mass a ton of armored personnel carriers and tanks, and then get them revved up, and then go across the line of departure and have an axis of attack, and do a feint from the left like we did during Operation Desert Storm. Well, those days are long gone, because not only satellite imagery can catch that, but the drones can catch that while you're massing the attack.
Yeah.
And so what do? Then we dig in and have trenches, and we go back to World War I. It just doesn't make sense.
Wow.
Well, as the really vehement anti-war guy on this conversation, when the cost of war isn't extracted in form of humanity, it's not a good thing for the future.
Yeah. So I say buy Bitcoin. take that money away from the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve can't print as much money, and it won't go to the defense industrial complex.
If you take away the consequences of sending our young sons and daughters to die, I mean, you're talking about a really bleak future. So on that note, Brent, it's been great to have you. We will have you on again. Very thankful to chat with you. And
great.
We'll certainly chat down the road, and I appreciate you being on.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, as always, Jack, that was a great conversation. Thanks for being a part of it. And let's try to get a little more consistent with it, because it's fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
All right. Cheers, man.